Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another randomised gaming video. And I will be your host for this randomised gaming video, the editor of Randomised Gaming, Random Gamer Riven. Now, in today's very special video, we actually have a hardware review. And this hardware review is for the Kaico GameCube to HDMI upscaling adapter. Now, in the interest of randomised gaming being open and transparent, I must confirm that we were sent a sample copy of Kaico's HDMI adapter for GameCube in order for us to review. However, randomised gaming does have full creative control over this review, and we will be looking at both the pros and the cons of the Kaico HDMI adapter. And just to add to this, I should also state there are other HDMI adapters available on the market as well for Nintendo GameCube. Now, Kaico did send us this device a few weeks ago, and one of the reasons that I've taken a little while to do this review is I've really wanted to put the device through its paces, because if we are going to actually recommend it at the end of the review, I wanted to make sure this wasn't going to break down after 10 minutes of play. And we put it through an awful lot of tests, stress testing, and we tested it against various games using various resolutions. So we've tested it at 576i games, at 480i on 240p titles such as the Gameboy Advance games or retro collections, and finally testing it using progressive scan as well. And so far I can report, based on the number of games we've tested with it, everything has worked correctly and we've had no clear issues. And this includes testing the device with games from all three major regions. So we've tested it with a number of PAL exclusive games that ran at 576i. We've tested a number of NTSC EU exclusive games, such as the North American ones. And finally, we've tested it with a number of NTSC-J Japanese only games as well. And one of the reasons for looking at such a large sample is A, because I know we have viewers who watch our channel from all over the world. The second was I really wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, put this device through its paces to check that it does work with games from all aspects of the GameCube. Because I've seen a few reviews of other HDMI devices that have been very limited with what they've looked at. They've only looked at one or two games, and I've wanted to give a really big sample so that you can see the quality of this device for yourself. Now, just before I start the core of the review, I just want to point out a couple of things. Firstly, if possible, please watch in 1440p. That's because that has a higher YouTube bitrate and you'll actually see a better quality of the video itself. And remember, these videos are direct captures using an Elgato HD Pro 60. Now, most of the footage that will be shown in the background comes from the Kaico GameCube HDMI converter. Some of it won't, however, so in the top right corner I will be showing the resolution the footage was captured at and which device it was using, so whether it's GameCube. We have captured some Wii footage and even some Wii U footage, and we've captured some RGB SCART footage for comparison as well on the GameCube. As not all GameCubes support 480p, that's progressive scan, out of the box, we will be showing a mix of games at progressive scan and interlacing, so you can see an idea of how the Kaico handles both interlacing footage and progressive scan. It's also worth me noting these days, however, there are programs like Swish that if you have a GameCube set up for homebrew, you can force a large majority of games into 480p, and I will also make a mention in the top right corner if a game's using Swish to force it into progressive scan as well. So to start with, let's talk about what you get in the box with your Kaico HDMI GameCube adapter. So on top of the unit itself that plugs directly straight into your GameCube, you get a remote control which has 6 buttons. You also get a HDMI lead included with it, and the one we got here at Randomised Gaming in the box was 1.8 meters long. There is a full colour manual that is 15 pages long, includes 2 pages for notes, and it includes 2 pages for each of the following languages. So you have English, German, French, Italian, Spanish and Japanese on how to use the device. There's also a nice inlaid tray inside the box for the remote and the GameCube HDMI adapter to sit inside. And finally, you also get a lithium battery for the remote control unit. It's actually the CR2032 model, which is the same one I believe that powers the Sega Saturn internal memory and the Dreamcast VMU units. Now, the device itself is plug and play and very easy to set up. All you do is plug the Kaico HDMI output adapter into your GameCube, which, as I mentioned before, must be a revision with the digital output port on it. In our case, it is DUL 001. Although in Europe that was actually the mass-produced model and is pretty common to find. In fact, the one that doesn't have the digital output AV port on it was the DUL 101. There may be a few other revisions, but the 101 revision in Europe is particularly rare to find because it was really a late life revision change. However, that version is best avoided, as not only does it not have a digital output port on it, it also doesn't support action replays, doesn't allow you to change the nameplate and a few other things, so just avoid that model of the Cube period. But if you are unlucky enough to have that model, you will need to get a new model of the GameCube, as the Kaico GameCube HDMI adapter isn't supported. The only other thing you need to do to get started is, once you plugged it into your GameCube, is to plug the HDMI into the back of the Kaico HDMI adapter, and finally plug that into a TV and plug the battery into the remote for the Kaico adapter as well. Once you've done that, it's a case of turning on your GameCube and you're all set to go. Okay, so now that we've taken a look as to what you get in the box, it's time to actually take a quick look at the software included on the Kaico GameCube to HDMI adapter. So you can see here, it's running GC Video by Ingo Corbury, which is a very nice piece of software, and a large chunk of the HDMI adapters available are actually using GC Video. So I'm actually running, this is the GameCube PAL BIOS I'm running in the background. As you can see there, it's running at 576i, as this is the PAL version. So first off, you have the line doubling ability, and that's switched on, and that converts the input, which is currently 640, 520, interlacing 50 frames per second or 50 hertz, and it converts it into effectively 720, 576p at 50. So effectively, the line doubling turns the interlacing into progressive scan field, which makes it far nicer for LCD TVs to read. If you turn off the line doubling, the input will remain interlacing and the output will then be interlacing as well. And interlacing is primarily designed for CRT televisions. The reason being, a strong interlacing signal will actually remove the scan lines totally. So a lot of the GameCube games, if you play them on a high quality CRT, will actually not have scan lines because of how they use the interlacing. They actually remove the scan lines totally. The only ones that do have scan lines are generally the older games that are using like 240p. The majority of them on the GameCube use interlacing, and it gets rid of the actual scan lines. Now, if you want to, you can also add scan lines if you want an authentic look. Largely, as I mentioned, as a lot of games don't use scan lines, it's only really relevant to turn them on. Noticeably some of the retro collections or a few of the games that did use 240p resolutions. So just a demo, you have the scanline option off. I've just turned it on. Now, scanlines are only available if the line doubler is active. So you can see there, this is scanline strength set to 0, and 0, a low value, means it's set to the highest on this one. So I'll just show you if I just exit the menu there. As you can see, the scan lines are on strong. So you can also change the scan lines on, that effectively alternate whether they're on the even or odd scan lines, which changes the alignment of the scan line slightly. You can also change the alternation of the scan lines, which adjusts the picture further as well. And certainly it's worth having a fiddle to get those, to adjust it to the scan lines to get them how you want. You can also reduce the strength by turning up the number. Admittedly, I'd have thought turning down the number would set the value to 0, but actually in this, turning down the number increases the strength, turning up the number reduces it. So I'll just turn it up. I think the max is about 250. I actually find having a high scanline number, so a low scanline strength, is closer to the actual original hardware for a lot of the cases. So I'll just turn it up to, let's go up to the max, it'll pretty much, 255. So effectively there, it's pretty much turned the scan lines off. Let's just turn them on to a nice little lower number, just to give you a sample of it. So you've actually got quite a good spectre range. I should say the Elgato, as you're seeing here, may black out the picture black and white at the high strength scan line. So that's not an issue with the actual adapter itself. That's an issue with the capture card and the Elgato. Put it about there. So you can see I've got slightly stronger scan lines. You may not be able to see them that clearly in this video because capturing footage may reduce the quality of the scan lines, but they are there in this one. I'll show you some game footage that's much more representative of the scan lines because, of course, we've got a black background here. But just wanted to give you an overview of all the different options, and I'll go through the games again later in the video. So the OSD settings, you can change the menu pop-up on and off. When some games change resolution, it'll pop up a quick banner with the resolutions it's changed to, so you can now change that off. And the background transparency fairly obviously changes the background blue tint transparency of the menus, and you can also change the colours of the menus as well with this options. So you've got the picture settings, you can adjust the brightness, contrast and saturation. At the minute I've got everything at neutral. Other settings include allow 480p mode, RGB limiter, enhanced DVI modes on, display a 16:9, mode switch delay, volume and mute. And here's the resolution supported mode, so you can check the sort of supported resolutions. You see there 240p, 288p, 480i, 576i, 480p, which is progressive scan, and 576p, which is also a progressive scan. Although 576p, I don't believe any game did naturally. It's only a program like Swiss can force it into that resolution. Effectively, 576p is good for power optimized games that if you throw into 480p have overscan, so i.e. the screen gets cropped. So if you put them into 570p, you'll then get a progressive picture in effectively at 50 Hz. So you can store settings, and finally about, so see there, GC Video DVI version 2.4D Indigo Corbury. So yes, GC Video, a really nice program. There is one slight downside with the Kaico adapter. You'll see that it says version 2.4D for the firmware. Now, this was the last really stable build. However, recently, within the past few months, at the start of 2020, they did release GC Video 3.0. Now, that firmware is still being updated at the minute, but it's worth noting if you want to update the actual Kaico HDMI adapter, this current version requires you to obtain a Zilliga programmer needed to update it, which is not a device I think many people have in the home. It's fair to say, if you're watching this video a year down the line, it will almost certainly, hell, even a few months down the line, you will almost certainly have the newer firmware on it. But at present, 2.4D is probably the most stable build, and I can't say I've had any problems with the firmware. I found it really, really good. So, but would I want to upgrade at some point? Probably, but at the minute, reading the amount of bug fixes they suddenly fired into the 3.0D, the fact they released 3.0 and updated it very, very quickly to D would suggest that that firmware is still not quite fully bug fixed yet. So I do agree that it's not, you don't want to jump into the latest firmware when they're still ironing out bugs with it. So that's a quick rundown of the actual software included on the Kaico HDMI adapter. Let's jump into some more game footage now. And while this gameplay footage is running in the background, it's time for me to explain why you would want a digital output GameCube adapter like this HDMI device over an analog one such as RGB SCART or S-Video. Now, with a well-built RGB SCART cable, you will get a fantastic picture on a CRT over an interlaced signal. RGB SCART's not so good using an interlaced signal on a modern LCD TV, primarily as most LCD TVs don't really support RGB SCART that well. The same goes for S-Video, but by default S-Video produced a weaker signal than RGB SCART to begin with. RGB divides the colours into three. Red, green and blue are the three primary TV colours. Strangely, yes, yellow is not a primary TV colour, instead it's green. RGB SCART and S-Video are also classed as analog signals and so can't do digital output. That is, they can't do progressive scan on the GameCube. Now, the GameCube itself does actually support progressive scan. That is, it supports a 480p signal, and this is generated by the games themselves. Now, not every game supports 480p. You have to basically turn on your game. Usually it's hold down the B button and then a menu will pop up that says, do you wish to run in progressive scan mode? This is the case for NTSC-U games, that's North American titles, and NTSC-J games, that's Japanese titles. Sadly, in Europe, every single game, if run in PAL, does not have a progressive scan option. A few European GameCube titles still actually have the progressive scan code left on them and can be forced into progressive scan, only, however, if they are booted using an NTSC signal, and we've only been able to do that with certain revisions of the action replay. These days, however, we also have another option, and that is using a homebrew software. In this case, the homebrew program Swish, which allows you to force the vast majority of PAL, NTSC-U and NTSC-J games into progressive scan, even if they didn't originally support it. And I'll be discussing a bit more about Swish later. Of course, there is one caveat with this, and that is that in order to get a progressive scan signal out of your GameCube, as you can't use analog outputs, you need to use a digital one. And that's where the Kaico HDMI adapter comes into play, as it outputs a digital signal and supports 480p from your digital output port, if the GameCube title you're playing supports it. And even if the game doesn't support progressive scan, you can still use the Kaico HDMI adapter with any other resolution, so 480i, 576i, etc. on the GameCube. Now I'll just let this footage of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker play out. And then it'll be time for us to take a comparison look at F-Zero GX running at 480i and 480p. Okay, so here we go with our F-Zero GX analog and digital signal comparison. Now I'm using RGB SCART for the analog signal running at 480i. Component leads will do a similar signal, I imagine, although we don't have an official component lead to test. S-Video, which it wasn't supported on PAL cubes, will give a weaker signal but will give a better signal than Composite, and Composite will give a much better signal than RF. So I'm not going to showcase RF, Composite or S-Video, as they all produce a much weaker signal than RGB. But this should give you an idea of what interlacing looks like at its best quality picture, and this is being run on an open source scan converter. And on the right I have progressive scan run by the Kaico HDMI Gamecube adapter, and this is over HDMI. I should note I would expect component and the D-terminal official cables to give a similar picture to the one shown on the right. But as you can see from this comparison, the right signal picture is vastly cleaner and sharper, and it's noticeable on just about everything. The detail is much more noticeable over the progressive scan. Okay, so that was a two-way split screen comparison. I've now got a four-way split screen comparison for you. So from left to right, on the far left we have our old school scaler running in 480i RGB, and that's actually outputting 720. That's actually an interesting scaler, as it's designed to do interlacing, and when it's fairly still it actually gives a really sharp picture. In the motion it does have a blur effect, but it does actually handle the resolution changes better, and you won't see the shimmer that you will in open source scan converter pictures. or the Kaico at 480i. But this was 480i RGB SCAR, and it's not a bad picture, but yeah, the blur, you do notice it's definitely, in motion, it's definitely the weakest picture. The blur just obscures a lot of the detail and sharpness. Next one along is the open source scan converter in 480i RGB, outputting at a multiplier, line doubling, and its bobbin interlacing, I believe, and that's basically the same videos you saw before. So third from the left or middle right, that is the Kaico GC in 480i. That's via HDMI, I should add, and that's using the line doubler, but that's actually said that's 480i. So you'll see that's very, very similar with the open source scan converter. Incidentally, all of these had the colours at neutral, I should say, when we were capturing them. And finally, we have the Kaico GC on the far right in 480p HDMI and outputting 480p. So that's true 480p picture as the input is 480p. And as you can see, the sharpness and clarity in that one is by far the best. It really does look cleaner. There's just touches of detail you can see in that one that you can't see in any of the other videos. But I think that's quite a nice four-way comparison. I think this should give you a good idea, as F-Zero is a really graphics-heavy game on the GameCube. Nintendo did actually release 2 official cables that did support the digital output. However, as far as I'm aware, they were only released in Japan, and they were the D-terminal device and the component cable device. Now, I've heard the component cable device was also a mail order only in North America. However, neither were released in Europe or PAL territories. What makes it worse now is the price of both is astronomically high to buy now, and it's fair to say most modern TVs don't even support component or D terminals, so you still need sort of mid-range LCDs. So from about 5 or 6 years ago, most modern 4K TVs will only literally support HDMI, which presents quite a problem if you actually own the official component cables or D-terminal cable, as it's going to be hard to even find a TV to plug them into. And you're going to likely need a scaler device such as an open source scan converter which supports scaling for, say, component. D-terminal's pretty uncommon here in Europe and North America, and it's going to be very tricky and actually rather hard to find scaler devices that actually support the D-terminal these days, as the format D-terminal was largely only used in Japan, and only the FrameMeister scaler actually supports it. The biggest problem with the official component and D-terminal cables, their price these days is incredibly expensive. I'm talking in the region of £120 plus to purchase them. On top of the fact you're then going to need scaler devices to support them. If you already own the official cables, then you may want to, however, look at actually getting scalers to support them. Certainly if you have other consoles that would support them as well. So if you have a GameCube component cable, and if you've got an Xbox component cable and a PS2 one, then having an open source scan converter, which Kaico also do, would be a great idea, as the open source scan converter would support all three. If you only have a GameCube, however, then I would certainly suggest recommending the Kaico HDMI converter over the open source scan converter. However, to be brutally honest, about 99% of GameCube owners won't own an official Nintendo component or D-terminal cable. Even 99% of the people watching this video probably won't have one if you have a GameCube. There's a very small minority of GameCube owners that actually have the official component cables. So, that makes this, the Kaico HDMI adapter, the perfect alternative to being able to get your GameCube to display 480p progressive scan mode without getting an official component cable. In fact, based on the additional options, this is actually a better option, as the official component cable is a bit of a messy contraption. You see, Nintendo were rather lazy with it and only included the 3 video cables on it. So that's the red, blue, green video cables. You still had to actually plug in your composite AV cable into the standard analog port to get the sound out. So it made it a little bit of a cabling mess, actually. You had to have basically cables into both the ports, whereas the Kaico HDMI Gamecube adapter does the sound and video out of the HDMI digital port, really giving you the best of both worlds. On top of that, the Kaico HDMI adapter, because it's using GC video, comes with a number of additional features that you won't be able to use if you have an official component or D-terminal cable. And because the Kaico HDMI Gamecube adapter uses HDMI, it's going to plug straight into the back of any modern TV at present, making it really easy and user-friendly to both install and use. So all in all, this makes it a far better alternative to the official component and D-terminal cables from Nintendo these days, and a far cheaper to purchase one as well. Now, it's fair to say there are a number of other HDMI adapters available on the market, and we haven't actually looked at any or reviewed any, so I can't comment, but as they use GC video, I would expect them roughly to have around the same picture quality. What I will say is, as Kaico are UK based, for us, as we're also a UK based YouTube channel, it's much easier for us to order from them rather than trying to order from the States. So ideally, as a UK based channel, we would prefer to order from the UK rather than ordering from some company in North America, due to the fact that if you import anything from, say, North America, you will likely be hit with duties and import taxes. So it's finally time to actually get onto the main point about the Kaico HDMI adapter, and that's actually the picture quality that this outputs. It's incredibly clean and sharp. Now, some of you out there may be looking at this video thinking, hang on, I've got a Nintendo Wii, I've got a component lead, why should I be using a device like this? And that's actually a good point. The Nintendo Wii, many models do support the Nintendo GameCube and have backwards compatibility. However, following tests, and we tested the GameCube picture quality against the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo Wii U using a select range of games that were on both formats, such as Mario Power Tennis and Pikmin 2, discovered that the GameCube adapter was actually producing a sharper picture than both the Wii and the Wii U's native output, and we were actually running the Wii U at 1080p. So it's fair to say the Kaico GameCube adapter in our tests actually produced a higher picture quality. Now I'm going to show you a sample of footage here from both games that I just mentioned. One would be Mario Power Tennis and the other would be Pikmin, and I'm also going to show you some zoomed in close-ups so you can additionally see the picture quality difference. This first split screen comparison you're seeing now on screen is the Nintendo GameCube version on the left versus the new Play Control Wii version on the right for Mario Power Tennis. So on the left we have the GameCube version running at 480p using the Kaico HDMI Gamecube adapter, and on the right we have the Wii version running also at 480p using the official component cables made by Nintendo. I will have to mention, if you see any slight artifacting in the Wii footage, there's the like stray dots, please ignore them. They are due to a standby mode flaw in the Nintendo Wii that actually damaged your graphics card, and unfortunately we had that happen to us. Now I'll cut to the point. You would expect the Nintendo Wii version, as it was a later release of Mario Power Tennis, to look better and cleaner and sharper using the official Nintendo component cables. However, it doesn't. As you can see in this footage, if you pay special attention to sort of the edging and the detailing, you'll just notice it's a bit cleaner and a bit sharper. Even on if you go back to the title screen, you could see that like things like Peach's nose is just a touch more clearer in the GameCube version. There are some slight aspect ratio changes, I should note, and the Wii version does support widescreen, but I'm not putting it into widescreen because when you put Wii games into widescreen, same with GameCubes, as the GameCube and Wii doesn't do proper widescreen resolutions, you actually lose graphical fidelity. So I really want to show you the best case scenarios in both games, and it's only fair that I compare them both at 4:3. But as you can see here, the Wii version is just a bit blurry, it's not as clean, not as sharp. Just one final point I'd like to add. The reason we are showing the new Play Control version of Mario Smash Tennis on the Nintendo Wii is that we don't have the ability to force the GameCube version into 480p on the Wii. So in the interest of fairness and comparison, we wanted to make sure we had a version of the game that showed a 480p signal. right now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the really interesting comparison. So I'm going to show you the same GameCube footage on the left, and I'm going to have to slightly overlap it as I'm using the Wii U footage, and the Wii U only runs the game in widescreen, I should add. The Wii U is actually running at 1080p for this footage. I didn't want to shrink it down too much, otherwise you would lose the quality. So I've kept it fairly large. So there's a little overlap. I do actually swap the overlap when we get into the actual game footage because I wanted to show you the umpire on the GameCube comparison, but it's a good comparison size sample so you can see. Right is the Wii U 1080p using HDMI. I should also add there's a slight issue with the Wii U's default brightness, which is something that has plagued all our Wii U videos. You can adjust it slightly, but it's basically the Wii U has a really weird brightness setting that's just not good for any games on the system. I do urge you to pay close attention to things like the tennis net in the centre of the court and during the preview, and even the umpire's chair and things like that, which is why I actually included it on the GameCube side. You will notice a substantial difference in quality. The Wii U version looks noticeably poorer, which may surprise quite a few of you, but yes, noticeably there's a lot less detail. Certainly during the intermission section when it's just before the match starts, if you look at like the umpire's chair in that sequence and when the net appears, you can certainly see the detail differences really, really noticeable. It's fair to say the Wii U's video display of Wii games is not up to scratch, and it does look noticeably worse than even the original Wii. So I'm not sure what the issue was, but Nintendo clearly had a hardware problem with the Wii U they were never able to properly address when it came to Wii video display. Which isn't helped either by the fact that the games always have to run in 16:9 and you can't actually tell them to run in 4:3 and just have borders on the side of the screen. There is also slightly less ringing artifacting and colour bleeds on the colours when you zoom in and take a really in-depth look. Now admittedly you don't often play at that level of zoom, but I'll be showing you some comparison screenshots shortly. In the meantime, I'm actually going to show you a three-way split now where we're running it in slow motion. And we've also zoomed in this footage as well, so you can actually get a clear look at the detail levels of all three versions. So left will be the Nintendo Wii using component cables. In the centre we have the GameCube version using the Kaico HDMI adapter. And finally on the right we have the Wii U running it over HDMI using the Wii version. Now if you spend a bit of time analysing this footage, you'll see there's definitely a clarity and sharpness present in the Kaico HDMI footage that's not present in the other. There's definitely a slight blurriness in the other footage in comparison. Certainly look around the lettering that pops up, and just even there's just elements of detail you'll notice. The Wii is fairly close. The Wii is actually much better than the Wii U. The Wii U footage is just awful. And I have to admit, if you actually pay really close attention to the footage, you'll notice that a lot of detail and visuals are not the correct aspect ratio when put into widescreen. It's clear Camelot did a bit of a hack job fix for this, for the Wii version to add in the widescreen mode, and it's clearly not very good, unfortunately. Hence why the visuals actually look weaker on the Wii U, because they have to be displayed in 16:9. So my takeaway from this is if you do have the Wii version, don't play it in widescreen. There's just slightly cleaner sharpness, as I mentioned, in the Kaico footage. And also if you actually take a quick look at the net during play, you'll notice it in the Wii U version, it's almost just a blur. There's just next to no detail in comparison to the other two. Now I've got some static screenshots to show you as well, just because I think it's actually easier to see the comparison differences between the game running on the three different sets of hardware. It's also a great way for me to show you the quality difference if you're only able to view this video at say 720p, as YouTube does have very low video bit rates at 720p and 1080p, and stuff like this three-way comparison will probably look a bit blurry or have bit rate issues. So I'm actually going to recommend you just pause this video right now and just take some time to analyse this static screenshot. And once we're done, I'm then going to show you another static screenshot that's actually a zoomed in version of the umpire, where you can really see the net comparison differences in quality, and even the detail on the umpire, how it's much clearer on the GameCube version than it is the Wii, and even certainly the Wii U version. And now that's done, it's time for a quick three-way comparison of Pikmin 2 as well. So same thing again with this Pikmin video clip. I'm going to show you a 3-way comparison, then I'm going to show you a quick still screenshot straight after. Pikmin 2 definitely looks a lot cleaner than Mario Power Tennis. In fact, the Wii, Wii U and Nintendo GameCube version all look very similar. There's some slight aspect ratio changes as, again, the Wii U one does widescreen, same with the Wii. But I think it does widescreen much better than Mario Power Tennis. Overall, the picture quality is still slightly cleaner on the Kaico HDMI Gamecube converter, but the Wii and the Wii U are much closer this time. One little side note worth pointing out is the Wii version of the game actually has a corrupt graphics line at the very bottom of the screen. You can actually see it in the Wii U footage. You can't see it in the Wii footage. Wii U's on the right, Wii's on the left. I had to slightly crop the Wii to match it for this comparison. It was cropped out of the Wii footage on the left, but it was there. But you can see it in the Wii U one. Yeah, it's not very good at all, I have to admit. That's a really nasty bug with the Wii version of Pikmin 2. And finally, coming up now is the screenshot comparison of Pikmin 2. Just the one screenshot this time around. This is actually taken from an opening segment dynamic trigger point, so I can't actually get Captain Olimar to stand in the same position, and the same with the Pikmin as well, so they're always in slightly different positions because it's actually a real-time cutscene that takes place. But you'll notice on the left and the right have slightly dimmer visuals compared to the Kaico Gamecube, which is slightly sharper. Certainly if you look at the green leaves on the Pikmin themselves, they're just slightly sharper. You can see the detail a bit more defined as always. Now, another big reason to still own a Nintendo GameCube over a Nintendo Wii is the fact that a Nintendo GameCube can play Game Boy Advanced games. Yes, thanks to the Game Boy Advance player adapter, you have the option of playing every single game in the Game Boy Advance library, as this player is actually a full-on hardware accessory that allows you to plug the cartridges directly into it. And thanks to the Kaico HDMI converter, that means you can play every single game in 480p. Now, while they are a little pricey to buy these days, they're still well worth the outset. To go alongside the official software these days for the GameCube player, there is also a homebrew software program as well, which you're actually seeing running here in the video showing. I'm actually going to show you a selection of both the official and the Game Boy Advanced interface player software, which was developed by the homebrew team who also do Swish. And as you can see from the video playback, the unofficial software these days actually gives a better quality picture, as it irons out a number of bugs that were never fixed with the official software. The only downside with the Game Boy interface software is it doesn't have a proper way to swap cartridges. You have to hold reset, and it's a bit of an ugly method, but other than that, it gives you a far better experience playing Game Boy Advance games on it than the official software does these days. And the other thing is, you will find there are a lot of Game Boy Advance players around these days without the official software disc, so it's a great way to actually be able to use the Game Boy Advance player if you don't have the official software disc or have lost it. And as I'm getting older these days, I much actually prefer to play handheld games on the bigger screens these days than I do on the original handheld systems. So being able to play these games in 480p results in an incredibly sharp picture at 60 frames a second, on top of the fact you're using an actual hardware device to play these games for 100% accuracy. Worth me mentioning, the Wii U does have a number of Game Boy Advance games on the Virtual Console to purchase, and they do play and look lovely. Sadly, however, it has such a limited library, and the thing is you have to repurchase them, so if you've got the cartridges sitting around at your home, you can't play them on the Wii U, whereas you can do with the Game Boy Advance player. So for us here at Randomised Gaming, it's fair to say we feel that the Kaico HDMI adapter combined with the Game Boy Advance player and the Game Boy Advance interface software makes for a premium experience to play Game Boy Advance games, one that I much prefer than playing on the actual Game Boy Advance these days. As mentioned earlier, the Kaico HDMI Gamecube adapter did survive all our resolution tests along with GC Video, and we checked it with a number of PAL Gamecube exclusive games such as Asterix and Obelix XXL, Largo Winch and Neighbours from Hell, although I didn't record footage of the latter sadly. I also checked it with Micro Machines as well, which is a PAL exclusive, but that was only PAL exclusive because the North American release got cancelled. And it also supported 240p content, although I have to admit there's not a huge number of 240p games. In fact, a lot of the retro collections on the GameCube actually run at 480i and not 240p. But certainly the Mega Man X collection runs at 240p, but only the X one. The Anniversary collection runs at 480i, and the original Zelda collection also runs at 240p. So you can see a few of the retro games running in the background here. I'm also going to show you a few games with the scan lines on and off. As a lot of these retro games were designed to use scan lines, it's interesting to see how they look with the scan line generator on the GC Video. And if you have it at a high number, so it's got quite a low scan line strength, it actually looks quite nice. Granted, it doesn't look quite as good as if it was on actual CRT, but it's not a bad replacement. I'm personally not a big fan of scan lines these days, so I generally have them turned off on these sort of devices. I actually just prefer these sort of 480p look, I have to admit. Although one thing I will say is that the GameCube's 240p support is very ropey at best. It doesn't do colours correctly at 240p, and it does look a bit blurry. It looks like it's scaling it up, or perhaps doing something to it. It's not a native 240p, I feel, looking at it. It's certainly not as clean and sharp as, say, playing on a SNES or a Sega Saturn. And just to really showcase that point, I'm actually going to show you a quick video of me showing the opening of Mega Man X4. On the left we have the Sega Saturn North American version of Mega Man X4 that was captured via RGB SCART and using an open source scan converter at 240p. On the right we have the North American Mega Man X GameCube collection, and that is using the Kaico HDMI converter at 240p. Now, you would expect the picture here to be pinprick sharp like the Sega Saturn version. It isn't, and this is actually more a fault of the GameCube itself, not the Kaico HDMI adapter, in the fact that the GameCube doesn't really do 240p particularly very well. You'll notice in the Zelda footage we showed earlier, it was not sharp Zelda. It was a bit blurry around the edges. There's some artifacting and a few other anomalies that you wouldn't expect there in a basically a progressive scan picture. The same occurs here. It's a really weird issue the GameCube seems to have. On top of that, I think the GameCube actually has two issues. I think one, it's putting some sort of blither filter on top of 240p games for some unnecessary reason, so perhaps you might be able to turn that filter off. The other problem, which is exclusive to this collection, is the fact that they've ported the inferior PS1 version, so you're actually missing things like the flaming aurora effect seen in the background of the second half of the original stage after the Sky Lagoon crashes in the Saturn's version. The other thing that's really weird, and I'm not sure if it's in the original PS1 version or not, as we don't actually have a copy of the PS1 version, there's dithering in the background of the whole of the GameCube section. So either that's a remnant of the PS1 version, or the emulator, whatever program software they used to emulate the PS1 for this collection, has inadvertently left the dithering filter on and not removed it. So I'm not sure which is true, but either way it just looks terrible because you have an additional dithering filter added as well. And just to showcase this issue even more, here's a close-up zoom of both the Saturn and the GameCube port of Mega Man X4. And you can see the Saturn version is far cleaner, sharper, there's no colour run, there's no bleeding effects or ringing artifacts. We just have a very clean, sharp, pixelated picture, whereas the GameCube version clearly has artifacting, overruns, and that weird dithering filter as well. So overall, the GameCube version is not the best one to play and doesn't look particularly good either. So in contrast to that Mega Man X4 footage, I'm actually going to quickly show you some footage from Mega Man 6 and Mega Man 7. Now, neither are correctly being emulated at 240p in the Mega Man Anniversary Collection, but in this first footage I'm just going to show you is at 480i, and as you can see, despite the fact there are one or two anomalies, overall the picture quality does actually look vastly better even at 480i to the 240p content shown in the Mega Man X4 video, despite the fact the emulation quality is noticeably weaker in this collection. And the same actually applied to the Tower of Duraga footage as well. Again, that was a NES port adapted for the GameCube, and it's using the NES version, but again that was scaled up to 480i, or 480p as we were showing in the footage, and again it wasn't using 240p natively, and as a result looked cleaner and sharper again than the Mega Man X4 footage. The one thing I will note about the Mega Man Anniversary Collection is, again, it's clear to see that there's some sort of what I'd describe as a linear filter present, and I do wonder if that's something the GameCube adds automatically, something similar to what the Xbox does as well with its weird blur filter. Something you can quite clearly see in the Mega Man 7 footage, as it's just not as sharp as it should be compared to the SNES version. Now, one of the things with the Mega Man Anniversary Collection is, and the Mega Man X Collection, is both do not support progressive scan. This next footage of Mega Man 8 here is actually me forcing it into progressive scan, that's 480p, via the homebrew software Swish. And if you look at it in comparison to the previous footage we've shown, you'll see how much sharper it looks and how really clean and defined it is. Now, in fairness to the Mega Man X Collection on GameCube, you can't yet use Swish to force it into progressive scan particularly very well. At the minute I think there's a bug where you can only force the menus into progressive scan, you can't force the games. And I wasn't able to get the 240p force mode to work with it either, or my TV, so I couldn't quite work out what was going on there. But as you can see from this footage, Mega Man 8 is super clean, crisp and sharp using this method. And now I'm actually going to show you this 480p forced footage when I apply Scanlines as well. So I'm going to do a three-way split screen comparison showing no scan lines, showing a low level of scan lines, and showing a high level of scan lines. I'm going to show it for Mega Man 8, and then I'm going to show it for the original Mega Man as well. And that way you can draw your own conclusions as to which of the scan line settings you actually like. Bear in mind there's a big spectrum that you can choose from, so this gives you a rough idea of the various amounts of settings you have for the scan line options. And on my own personal opinion, I'd say for me, although I don't like scanlines that much, the middle picture, which will be the low scanline settings, actually looks very nice on both Mega Man 8 and the original Mega Man. Okay, so it's finally time I bring this review to an end and bring up my summing up and opinion on it. Overall, I think this is an excellent piece of hardware kit that is perfect for people who want to get the very best quality picture out of their Nintendo GameCube. Now, it's fair to say you will need to be able to force 480p or have North American or Japanese games that support 480p by default to get the best out of this device. After all, it's using the digital port, and Nintendo games using the digital port were supposed to be using 480p. So certainly, if you do pick up a device like this, I highly recommend you look at getting the homebrew program Swish that allowed you to force pretty much every single GameCube game into either 480p or even 576p for those handful of PAL games that don't properly support 480p. While Swish doesn't yet have 100% compatibility with every single GameCube game out there, it does support the vast majority, and certainly the vast majority of PAL games we've tested, we've been able to force into 480p via it. While some PAL games can be forced into 480p if they still have the NTSC code on the disc, we've discovered that this can only be done with an older action replay, and so far we've only found about 9 games that have included such support. Although in order to use Swish you will require some additional software purchases, you will have to purchase the latest version of the Action Replay which supports SD media. You will need an SD card that the Action Replay and Swish support, and then you will also need an SD media loader card. That is a card that the SD card plugs into, and then that plugs into your GameCube memory card slot. So you're probably looking of an outlay of around £30 roughly to be able to get an SD loader and Swiss setup, on top of having to download the software. The Kaico GameCube HDMI adapter is around £60, so it's not that cheap to pick up and is quite an investment. And I have to admit, the one thing I will say, if you already have an official GameCube component lead, you may be better off picking up an open source scan converter instead if you have a number of other consoles that would support it, as open source scan converters are roughly around double the price and they support a lot more formats. In fact, it supports RGB, component and VGA. So if you've got a large chunk of consoles you want to play on a sort of modern TV device, I would look at an open source scan converter instead if you already have the component leads. And certainly Kaico do make open source scan converters. We have one of their scan converters and I will highly recommend it. But if, like us, you didn't have a GameCube component lead, then this really is an essential piece of hardware to get 480p out of your GameCube. The price is vastly cheaper than the official component leads. It has more options than the official component leads. So overall it really is a win-win. But as I mentioned at the start of this summing up, you will need to be able to get 480p out of your GameCube in order to get the best picture from it. Overall, the device comes highly recommended. I've given it a very thorough testing over the past, I think, a month and a half now. I've not had it break or anything like that. It's remained strong. I must admit, Kaico did our open source scan converter and that's still going strong for the last year now, so I've been very pleased with them. And yep, it's a good strong device. It's a nicely snug fit into your GameCube that matches the official output plug well. Really is a very nicely designed piece of kit. And it comes with a remote control as well to adjust the options. So overall, great quality picture. I can't fault the hardware in any way. I've not had it break or anything. Really good. Certainly if you're a GameCube connoisseur who wants the best picture out of the GameCube, you can't go wrong with a device like this. I should stress there are other rival manufacturers out there who do also make GameCube HDMI adapters. Certainly the Kaico one really is an excellent piece of hardware and comes highly recommended from Randomised Gaming. And while we were sent this copy to review, I would stress if we ever needed to pick up a second one, we certainly would. This really is an excellent piece of kit. You can pick this up from Kaico's official website. They also have storefronts on Amazon UK, Amazon Germany or Amazon Deutschland, and the Central North American store Amazon.com. It's officially priced at £69.99. Currently it's actually on sale as of the time of recording of this video at £54.99. Prices will vary depending on the exchange rate and where you are in the world. And of course, if you are watching this video a year down the line, please check out Kaico's website for the latest prices. Okay everyone, thank you for watching. I have been your host, Random Gamer Riven, for this randomised gaming hardware review. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope it's provided you with enough information to help you make your decision on whether this is the type of adapter you want. If you have any questions, please do leave a comment below in the descriptions. If you'd like to see more sort of hardware reviews, then please let me know. I know this has been a pretty marathon video actually making it. It's taken me much longer than I initially thought it was going to. But as always, if you like our content, then please do hit that like button, as it does help with our video rankings. And of course, if you're watching this video and not a subscriber and you like this video, then please do hit the subscribe button, join us, and you can hit the bell button for additional notifications. I should also just point out that we've now been using this device for around about 2 months now. So on top of all the footage shown in this video, any footage we've captured on the channel for the Nintendo GameCube or the Game Boy Advance since about the end of February, the start of March, has been using this device. So we already have a huge library of videos showing this device in action on top of this review now. And we will be using this device for all our future Nintendo GameCube and Game Boy Advance captures on top of Game Boy Color captures as well. I suspect some of you may now be asking some questions about Swish on the Nintendo GameCube and about forcing games into 60Hz on the GameCube. Do let me know in the comments if you want to see a follow-up video on Swish. I suspect I will probably do one regardless, as I probably should do, seeing as how it has essentially become my go-to way to play Nintendo GameCube games. As Swish is the perfect program to force PAL games at 50Hz only into 60Hz and has the ability to force the vast majority of GameCube games into 480p as well if you have the ability to play games via progressive scan. It's worth noting we here at Randomised Gaming have discovered some older versions of the Action Replay can do something similar. Certainly they can force 50Hz games into 60Hz and they can force a few games into progressive scan as well, but not many. But certainly a follow-up video to this explaining that would be the perfect companion. Alright ladies and gentlemen, that is it from me. Thank you for watching. One last point, we are doing daily streams at present, so if you fancy joining me during a live stream, please do. They are at the minute running from 9:30 to 10:30 PM roughly UK time. And it's always really nice to have a chat with channel viewers in the live stream. I will be doing those while the current world events are still occurring at the minute. Okay, that's enough from me. It's time for me to say thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.